3 members of Congress have said Biden should be removed from office using the 25th Amendment. Of course he should. You only have to look at the stumbling, mumbling, bumbling performances we've had to endure the last few weeks to see that. He is clearly incapable of carrying out his duties properly. He thinks he went to the Tree of Life synagogue after the mass shooting there, but it turns out it was a phone call a year later. They have to tell him where he is, to wipe things off his face, which reporters to call on. If he can't run his own press conferences, how's he supposed to run the country? The people around Biden know how bad it is, but the last thing they'll ever do is invoke the 25th Amendment. They love this setup. A weak puppet who signs whatever they put in front of him. Perfect! That's the whole point of Biden. As the Silicon Valley saying goes, Biden's mental incapacity isn't a bug, it's a feature. It is why he's there. 46 members of Congress think Biden should resign, and of course, he should. Anyone with the slightest decency or responsibility, if they'd done this much damage to the reputation and authority of the country, would have resigned by now. But we know Biden won't. He's a vain, self-inflating machine politician who's been plotting and scheming to get this job his entire adult life. No joke, as Biden would say. In the mid-1960s, when he was in his early 20s, the first time he met the parents of his first wife, they asked him what he wanted to be, and he said, president. President of what? They asked. The United States, he replied. What kind of person talks like that, thinks like that? A sociopath with narcissistic personality disorder, that's who. Someone like that literally has no shame. Biden's not going to resign. So, how will there be accountability for the needless deaths, the nauseating debacle, the national disgrace of Biden's Afghanistan disaster? Mitch McConnell says, the midterms. What is he talking about? Biden's not on the ballot in the midterms. Yes, Biden's border crisis, his crime surge, his economic incompetence and disastrous handling of the pandemic, they'll all be part of the calculation voters make in 2022, but so will their views on their local candidate, issues in their district. Biden is responsible for the biggest foreign policy catastrophe in American history. And it wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just a policy that went wrong. It was cold, calculated cruelty, deliberately entered into for political reasons against the advice of the people on the ground. You can't just throw it in the mix alongside rising inflation and healthcare costs. If a president can do this much damage to the country, can be this derelict in his duty, can cause the death of 13 American servicemen and women and countless others without censure or rebuke, without any direct consequences, what does that say about the health of our democracy? People say, oh, well, you can vote against him in 2024. As someone might put it, come on, man. Who thinks Biden will be in any fit state to run again? The idea that he just slinks out of the White House without any sanction, any accountability for what he's done is unconscionable and unacceptable. So, we're left with only one option. Biden's behavior demands it and the circumstances require it. Biden must be impeached. And 11 members of Congress have already reached that conclusion. We know the threshold, high crimes and misdemeanors. There is no question, none, that Biden's behavior rises to that level. Here's how. 13 members of the United States military, hundreds of civilians, Afghans and others, are now known to have died outside the gates of Kabul airport from an ISIS-K suicide bomber. All these deaths were preventable and would have been prevented if not for the specific actions of the president. He said his military advisors told him to abandon Bagram. That's not true.
That our task was to protect the embassy in order for the embassy personnel to continue to function with their consular services and all that. If we were to keep both Bagram and the embassy going, that would be a significant number of military forces that would have exceeded what we had, or stayed the same, or exceeded what we had. So you had to collapse one or the other, and a decision was made.
It was Biden's decisions that gave the generals no choice but to abandon Bagram. He said, no one predicted the chaos.
The intelligence community did not say back in June or July that, in fact, this was going to collapse like it did.
That's not true. A State Department dissent memo from July, read by Secretary Blinken and communicated to Biden, is evidence that the president was warned of the Taliban taking over if the August 31st deadline was kept, but Biden insisted on keeping it anyway. We now know from that leaked phone call with exiled Afghan President Ashraf Ghani that he told Biden at the end of July how close things were to collapse. Biden ignored that too. And the single most damning piece of evidence, we now know that even after their rapid advance, the Taliban offered to allow the US to control all of Kabul, not just the airport. Biden keeps saying there was no alternative. That is simply not true. There was an alternative, and he rejected it. As a direct result of these decisions, countless Americans have been left stranded behind enemy lines. Biden promised not to leave until all Americans were out.
If there's American citizens left, we're going to stay till we get them all out.
That was August the 18th, and look where we are today.
We're hopeful that in the coming days, the Qataris will be able to resume air service out of Kabul. And if they do, we're obviously going to look to see if Americans can be part of those flights.
Yeah, we hope maybe some other country can get them out. We'll look to see, because you know what? We're moving on. We don't actually give a crap about the American citizens we swore an oath to protect. We don't give a crap about a direct and unequivocal promise the President of the United States made just days ago. All we care about is some demented PR scam to try and give Biden a sick, mission-accomplished moment on September the 11th. They keep saying they'll help get Americans out.
If an American in Afghanistan tells us that they want to stay for now, and then in a week or a month or a year, they reach out and say, I've changed my mind, we will help them leave.
Literally, the day after he said that, his own department issued a travel advisory telling Americans to make arrangements to leave that, quote, do not rely on US government assistance. The President of the United States has knowingly, deliberately left hundreds, probably many more of his own citizens in the hands of a murderous band of terrorists. He talks about their assurances.
The Taliban has made public commitments, broadcast on television and radio across Afghanistan, on safe passage for anyone wanting to leave, including those who worked alongside Americans.
Public commitments, yells Biden. Here's what the Taliban's public commitments are worth. From the New York Times, quote, Human Rights Watch established that 44 people were taken from their homes and executed in July in the town of Spin Boldak. All 44 had received amnesty letters from the Taliban. The Taliban sent them letters of amnesty, and then they killed them. That's how Biden intends to protect the lives of the Americans he left behind. The most sacred promise of the US military is leave no one behind. Biden left hundreds, maybe thousands behind. If a commander in the military did this, they would face a court-martial. Compounding his crimes, far from ending the forever war, as Biden pathetically tries to claim, he's just restarted it. Just listen to this devastating assessment from Leon Panetta, who served with Biden as Defense Secretary and CIA Chief.
I don't think there's any question that our national security is threatened by what has happened. There is no question that they will provide a safe haven for al-Qaeda and for ISIS and for other terrorists to be able to reorganize, strengthen themselves again, and potentially use Afghanistan as a base for attacking not just the United States, but other countries as well.
Biden caused the death of 13 service members. He has deliberately left hundreds of known, identifiable Americans in the hands of the enemy. He has knowingly created a new safe haven for terrorists to attack America when an alternative that would have protected America and protected Americans was available but rejected. If all that isn't impeachable, I don't know what is. This must be a litmus test for Republicans. Biden promised competence, but instead brought chaos. He promised compassion, but gave us cruelty. He has betrayed our allies, broken his sacred trust, brought shame and humiliation on the presidency and this great country. But our contempt for this utterly discredited, despicable man is not enough. He must be held accountable. Biden must be impeached.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.